Wakey, hello, good morning, and many thanks indeed for joining us here on Morning Prime, the second day of February 2023. And I'm glad that you're able to, of course, choose KTN News as your channel of choice to inform you this morning. Every Thursday we have Sequoia coming your way, where we take a look at the economic outlay of the country, and of course we focus on the biggest ticket issues, which is the tax wars, which is ongoing right now. We shall be looking at also what the projection from the Central Bank of Kenya has said regarding the, of course, foreign reserves and external deficits that we do have as well. But it looks to be very optimistic going by the projections that they're giving. But still, even as inflation will be tapering down, the taxes as well will be taking away all those gains that we'll have scooped from the tapering of inflation. We shall be looking at that this morning, and a raft of other issues as well, looking at the current debate that is ongoing on taxation and how that is bound also to affect Kenyans. The Kenya Association of Manufacturers have come out denouncing and decrying the stamp duties that is bound to be, of course, slapped on some of the products. And they're saying this will adversely affect the sector, and job losses will not be an option that will be off the table. We look at that and a raft of other issues. I'm joined this morning by Dr. Jim McPhee, who is the Director of School of Accountancy, Strathmore University. We have also the Chair of Kenya Diaspora Alliance. This is Dr. Shemo Chodo. We will be joined by Bill Okero, who is a businessman and a politician. Also will be joined by Munyasi Sakwa, who is an economist and politician as well, to just try and get the feel and flavor of where we are looking at the heartbeat of the economy. But before we do that, let's see what is fresh off the press this morning, beginning with the bold paper. And this is what you're waking up to today. War against Uhuru, or is it war against Uhuru, or is it real or ruse? That is what we have here on the front page of the Standard this morning. And this is a soft copy, because also when I look at my hard copy, it's a different story. The deal that earned Rigathi extra millions is what is the letters as well. Double victory for him. Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua has had the last laugh in his battle with the state, recovering his 202 million shillings that had been declared proceeds of crime, and getting the Asset Recovery Agency to pay more millions in costs. You can read all about it inside the Standard today. On page 4, he's had the last laugh in his battle with the state, recovering 202 million shillings that had been declared proceeds of crime, and getting Assets Recovery Agency to pay him more millions in cost. War against Uhuru, is it real or ruse? In the 4 months since he retired as president, Uhuru Kenyatta has faced a barrage of attacks, but some see what started as general criticism stemming from the 2022 campaign season morphing into a battle over taxes and his legacy. Yet others believe that there isn't any fight, but rather mind games played by the political elite. This is on page 6. It's a juvenile statement not worth responding to. Does he think President Uhuru Kenyatta is desperate for that job? Does Senator Cherogai really understand how diplomacy works? This is Opio Wandai, who is a House Minority Leader. And this is just reacting to, of course, the bill that he came up with. This is Senator Cherogai. And this is seeking to amend amendment of the law, I should say, exempting estates of ex-President Kenyatta and Moi from paying taxes. Exemption to only benefit vulnerable. This is what now Opio Wandai is responding to here on the front page of the Standard today. Remember, every Thursday you have the real estate coming your way, and today is focusing on the state being faulted for neglect of rental markets, and China dictated SGR conditions. It was impossible for Kenya to wriggle out of the SGR contract after China placed a condition that shielded it from competitive bidding. the Supreme Court has been told. This story continues on page 18 of the Standard. It is a special report that we want to read inside the Standard today. Pope hosts biggest mass in Congo visit. Pope Francis celebrates one of the biggest masses in history at the capital of DRC or DR Congo, which has the largest Catholic community in Africa. You can follow the story on page 28 of the Standard today. Clubs splashed 430 billion shillings on EPL transfers. All right, read who is going where, and that is stacked on page 46 of the Standard today. Let's see what the Daily Nation is holding for us. Ruto moves to break up groupings in coalition. Ruto moves to break up groupings in coalition. And looking at the flag there, it's all about politics. President seeking to consolidate power, deliver on pledges. Also, it's all about housekeeping. President William Ruto has moved to avert a fallout in his Kenya Kwanza alliance by banning regional caucuses in parliament that were reportedly inflaming tensions within the ruling coalition. This could also be aimed at containing factions from the Mount Kenya and Western that were coalescing around DP Rigathi and Prime Cabinet Secretary Musalia Mudavadi. You have the story on page 4 of the Daily Nation. 13 subjects, junior high on no child's play. Right, I like the plain words there. 13 subjects, junior high, no child's play. We're back to where 844 was. We could see those big bags saddled on young children's backs. Grade 7 learners who began the junior secondary education this week are studying more subjects compared to the last batch of 844 pupils who were in standard 8. The 1.2 million students in junior secondary school are studying 12 core subjects and a maximum of 2 optional subjects. Unlike the 5 they will have taken under 844. Before 844 went to 5 subjects, it was actually at 13 as well. So it seems that we've reverted there. You can read all about it on page 6 and 7 of the Daily Nation this morning. On the sidebar, it's all about cost right now. And diesel prices to rise on new pollution tax. State proposes a change in the taxation of fuel, which could see different fuel products taxed based on their contribution to greenhouse emission. This is on the back page of the Daily Nation today. And devolution, governors stick to their guns in revenue share stalemates. Counties are demanding 425 billion shillings from National Treasury in equitable share of revenue. This story, you can read all about it on page 8 of the Daily Nation today. And thousands attend Purple Mass in DRC. That is on 28. A land fraud parcel of how dead woman sold parcel. Right? You can read all about it on page 3 of the Daily Nation this morning. This is how it looks. Make sure. Also, frontline states regroup in terror. That is on page 2. Read all about it inside the Daily Nation. The Star, up next. Why Ruto and Uhuru war set to intensify. Why Ruto and Uhuru war set to intensify. Some of President's foot soldiers want former head of state sacked as regional peace envoy. This is on page 4 and 5. And there's a probing question about this, the army fatigue. Aren't they only meant for the CNC and disciplined forces? And this is being done by, of course, the CS Interior, Kithure Kindiki, during a tour of Lucky Chogo can be seen here donning the military fatigue. Also have the public service CS Aisha Juma at NYS headquarters. We do have Raraka, that is in Raraka. We do have also on January the 27th, when she was actually donning this. We have also Defense CS Adam Duale when he visited the KDF troops operating in various close operations forward operating bases. And that's the question they're asking. Aren't they only meant for the CNC, that is Command-in-Chief, and disciplined forces, this military or the security personnel fatigue? We have also Rigathi, a big win for him, as he gets back his frozen 202 million shillings. Also, SL schools plagued by bandits and rustlers become usable. That is another story that you want to follow on page 10 of the Star. Nyangasi, how I found purpose in treating cancer patients. You can read all about her inside the Star. People Daily, Baptism of fire for governors. Baptism of fire for governors. Long catalogue of problems. County bosses are battling rebellion from their juniors just 5 months after polls, while Treasury is yet to decide if devolved units will get the 425 billion shillings they need, and they're not drawing back, as you've seen from other headlines. And that story is tucked on page 6 and 7, 8 and 9 of the People Daily. Pop spreads hope, joy in troubled DRC, and they came out in force there, around 1 million people, to just listen from the pontiff. Pope Francis arrives at the Ndolo Airport in Kinshasa, in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Yesterday, he condemned the historical exploitation of Africa and spoke out strongly against economic colonialism, calling on those who plundered the DRC to acknowledge their past misdeeds and respect the country's citizens. Hands off the Democratic Republic of Congo. Hands off Africa. Stop choking Africa. It is not a mine to be stripped or a terrain to be plundered. These were the very telling words that were stripping off his tongue. I can take around the stars to World Cup. We have a promise there. And this is a bold national team manager, Engin Firat, who has a plan up his collective slaves to do that. Well, we'll see if we'll be there. And that is the story that you want to follow inside the People Daily today. And the regional talks to combat terrorists, and we can see President William Ruto with Ethiopia Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, Djibouti President Omar Guelleh, and their Somali counterpart Hassan Sheikh Mohammed during a meeting in Mogadishu on efforts to stabilize Somalia and eradicate terrorism. Also, BBC reported there was shelling near the venue of the talks. No casualties were reported, and that is all in an effort to try and curb that menace of a transnational threat from the terrorists. This is the People Daily. This is how it looks. Let's see what we have on the front page of Taifa Leo. Yesu wa Bungoma. Mkazi huyo wa Tongare anasema ni watu 168,000 pekee wataenda mbinguni kote duniani na wawili tu kutoka Nairobi. All right. That is what this Yesu wa Bungoma is saying. So going to heaven is only a preserve for 168,000, and only 2 from Nairobi will go to heaven. And this is in light of, according to his own interpretation, maelezo muhimu kumhusu Yesu huyu alizaliwa mnamo 1981. Jina lake Hassan Elud Simiu. Kwa mujibu wa majirani, wazazi wake walikuwa Francis Simiu na Cecilia Simiu, na walifariki akiwa na umri mdogo. Alisomea katika shule ya msingi ya Mukuyu na shule ya upili ya Mukuyu, Tongaren, kaunti ya Bungoma. Aliacha shule akiwa katika kidato cha kwanza. Alijitosa katika ukulima baada ya kuacha shule. Alioa akiwa na umri wa miaka 20. Ni baba ya watoto 8. Watoto wake wote wanaabudu katika dhehebu lake. Alianza kujiita Yesu, well, it doesn't really show here the year that he started calling himself Jesus. But, yeah, you need to sharpen your discernment. Well, they say in the last days, many will arise with false or strange doctrines as well. And this is what Yesu wa Bungoma is saying. So if you're in Nairobi and you don't make it to be the 2 who will go to heaven, then what really happens? Don't be disheartened. Just make sure that you're Bible literate, right? Let it be informed to know how to discern what is true and what is false. This is Taifa Leo for you. Today, you can read about Yesu wa Bungoma, and I'll leave it also to Dr. Shema Chodo to just comment on the Yesu wa Bungoma. I know Dr. Shema Chodo to be a church deacon. Are you still a church deacon?
Yes. You say once one?
Yeah, a Dr. Dokfi. So if you're not one of the 2 here in Nairobi, because he says that only 2 people from Nairobi will go to heaven.
I was just saying the most important thing for me is to be one of those 2, because otherwise anything else is not the present situation, I tell you.
If I'm the other one, then you're in trouble.
I'm in trouble. Because it's McPhee and Dr. Sean.
Yeah, but yes, Jesus is only global, so it can't only be for Bungoma. Unless Bungoma is defined to be global. He came for all of us.
But around 168,000 is what he says that will actually make it here to heaven, and only 2 from Nairobi. Yes.
Okay, well, the Bible says...
out of around, how many 9 billion we are right now? According to the latest UN report.
Humanity, no human being really knows the absolute numbers. But obviously, it's very difficult to go to heaven. And we all hope we do go to heaven.
Where is it difficult?
It said, the Bible says, for rich people especially, going to heaven is like an animal going through the eye of a needle.
The camel.
The camel, thank you. So it's extremely difficult, one would imagine. But we hope. And then it also said the path to heaven is a narrow one. It's not an easy one where everybody goes. But we pray and hope that at least all of us here go to heaven with our families and friends.
Well, we have the Pope who is around now. Maybe we can organize a meeting with the Yesu of Bungoma.
Just to get clarity on the issue.
Good idea.
Good idea. Yes, interesting. On a lighter note there. This is Cypher Law for you. Make sure you grab a copy. Let's buckle down to some business now. We see what the Business Daily is holding for us. And banks, SACCOs, double size of subsidized mortgage to 8 million. Banks and SACCOs, double size of subsidized mortgage to 8 million. We have the Kenya Mortgage Refinancing Company, which is raising the loan cap in Nairobi from 4 million. Average mortgage amount stood at 9.2 million shillings. This is what is on the front page of the Business Daily this morning. And this is a reality on the ground, even as the market from the real estate is, we have the market correcting itself. Mortgages are bound to really go up as it stands right now because of the taxation, the inflation rate as well. So we'll also be deciphering this with our panelist this morning. Also, how VAT export ruling will hit Kenyans firms, multinationals and persons who export services from Kenya, including cross-border consultancies, have been dealt a blow after the High Court threw out a petition challenging the imposition of value-added tax on their services, bringing to an end protracted court battles with taxmen. That story continues on page 4. Poster on the spot, over 540 million shillings pension dues. Postal Corporation of Kenya has been ordered to provide statement of deduction from beneficiaries of the Kenya PCK Staff Retirement Scheme for the past, that is Postal Corporation of Kenya Staff Retirement Scheme, for the past 7 years. After trustees of the scheme complained of unremitted dues amounting to 540 million shillings. Also, court quashes betting tax limit on gambling in 5-star hotels. The High Court has quashed laws that restricted gambling in the city to 5-star hotels with casinos and 7.5% excess duty imposed on cash set aside by punters in their wallets for gaming. Justice Anthony Mrima said the two laws were not subjected to public participation in breach of the Constitution, which demands community input before major decisions are taken. This story continues on page 2 of the Business Daily. Let's cross over now to Uganda. S1 selection kicks off amid cheating claims. Rush for top layer. Ministry of Education issues caution as thousands of head teachers descend on Uganda Manufacturers Association grounds in Lugogo, Kampala today to pick the top brains to join the schools for secondary education. That story continues on page 4 and 5. Amid cheating claims, it seems also this is a menace happening in Uganda. It is not just here in the country. NSSF inquiry board speaks out on 6 billion shillings pay claim. That is Ugandan shillings there. You can read the rest of the story inside the latest copy of the Daily Monitor. Disagreements rock 140 47 billion shillings Munyonyo Convention Center. Government to set up body to review civil servant salaries there, and health finance ministers clash over drug stockouts. That is a daily monitor happening in Uganda. Also today, you can read all about a man who's 64, walks from Kampala to Kitgum ahead of Janani Luwumde. That is inside the news beat, the Daily Monitor. In Tanzania, Bank of Tanzania ordered to float tender award for banknotes reprint. The Public Procurement Appeals Authority has ordered the Bank of Tanzania to refloat a multi-billion shilling tender for the reprinting and supply of banknotes after noting vetting flaws. So it has to be retendered there. You can read all about it inside The Citizen. Also, Ministry calls for private investment to fill energy gap. Investing the future of digital storytelling. Read all about it inside The Citizen if you're waking up in Tanzania. Still in Tanzania, Mwananchi is up next. Kauli ya Samia yaibua mazito is what we have as the headlining story today. Sakata la plea bargaining. You can read all about it inside Mwananchi this morning. And in Rwanda, Heroes Day is a reminder of our ability to stand up for what is right. This is what Kagame is saying. We honor the Rwandan men and women whose bravery and patriotism lay the foundation for a nation. And you can see him here alongside the First Lady, President Kagame, and the First Lady, Jeanette Kagame, laying a wreath to pay tribute to Rwandan heroes at the National Heroes Mausoleum in Kigali on Wednesday, February the 1st. Kagame said the bravery and patriotism of Rwandan heroes laid a foundation for a nation of people determined to shape their destiny. This is on the front page of the New Times this morning if you're waking up in Rwanda. Well, if you're just joining us this morning, just to remind you, we're holding court with Dr. Jim McPhee, who is the Director of School of Accountancy, Strathmore University. Also, Dr. Shemo Cholo, who is the Chair of Kenya Diaspora Alliance. Also, we'll be joined by Bill Okero, who is an economist and who is a businessman and also a politician. Economist Bunyasi Sakwa will be joining us. He's an economist as well as a politician. And after the issues that we are looking on this morning, and I just want to begin where we are with the tax wars so far that we've been, of course, seeing playing out in the public gallery lately, and what it does really portend. With that, we have the Kenya Association of Manufacturers who are really decrying the stamp duties. They're saying going forward, this will adversely affect this particular sector, and job losses is not off the table with the stamp duties, slapped on alcohol, the sin tax that they are really talking about, water bottle, the water bottle excess terms as well. Good to see you, Dr. McPhee.
Thank you very much indeed.
Is it too late to say Happy New Year or Happy Felicitation for the year? I haven't seen you this year.
It's already February, but, yeah.
Until July is still happy. Good to see you. Right, but you've been reading all about what is happening currently and the wars on the taxes that are being raised. We have now one of the senators also coming up with this amendment bill that we want to review the exemption, of estate duty levy on the former retired presidents in this country. People are reading, a bit of politics into it. Saying, why is it a providential time that it should come now? People also were noting it that taxes should be paid by everyone. There should not be exemption of anyone really paying taxes, and they're saying this is a salutary way to go if we are to really plug and tighten and, of course, have a very good tax regime in this country. I don't know what you as a tax expert, first of all, what has been also playing out in your mind, some of the permutations after you saw this really playing out?
Well, I spend quite a lot of my time listening to an African-American economist. He's now, on the June the 30th, he'll be 91 years old, but he's very, very lucid still, and he's doing research in the west of the United States and doing a lot of research. And the point here really...
Thomas, I can't remember.
Thomas Sowell.
Thomas Sowell, yes.
S-O-W-E-L-L.
Yeah.
Now, the point that Tom makes is that, you know, when you start increasing taxes, you've got to remember that individuals are free people. They can go to, you know, for example, here in Kenya, you have a number of, let's say, better off people who are down in Mombasa. You have a number of people living in Nairobi. We've got an excellent climate in Nairobi. People love it here. I was talking to some people from Estonia yesterday. You've got snow in Estonia, but you've got the sun in Nairobi. So Kenya is an attractive place to come to. And when you start imposing all sorts of taxes, it becomes a real disadvantage for a country. And we have to always keep in mind, I was talking to someone last Monday, they want to go into French-speaking West Africa. And the real attraction of going and setting up their company in Mauritius rather than Rwanda, the rate of tax is 30%, the corporate rate of tax is 30%. Mauritius, it is 3%. 3%. So you make a profit in your trading in West Africa, in your services. This is a service entity, it's an IT company. So and I was with a Kenyan, and I was going for Rwanda because I feel that, you know, it's better situated, it's closer to your markets. Mauritius is 4.5 hours away by plane. It's difficult to get there. But, you know, the tax is the thing that will probably make the decision to, you know, go to Mauritius. So I think, see, this is where, you know, what we've got to understand is that Kenyans have got to become very much more frugal. We have a trade deficit. In the first 11 months of last year, our trade deficit is 2 trillion shillings. So in other words, our exports are, you know, if you take the major exports, okay, tea is 148 billion. Politics is coming into tea. People are saying, look, we've got to make value addition. But, you know, these are people who are in Parliament, who don't actually go and inform themselves of the reality on the ground. And the result is that, you know, they start talking about things which cannot work. So this is where it's so important for everyone to realize, you know, we've got an economy which, in fact, is very difficult to run in some ways. Why? You know, let's suppose, for example, you take manufacturing in Kenya. You were talking about the Kenya Association of Manufacturers, and they, you know, I remember I was there 2 years ago at their offices, and they were mentioning there that, look, you know, tax is driving business out of Kenya. People who own a business in Kenya, they want to expand, rather than expand their Kenya operation, they actually go and start a factory in Uganda. Now, this has a problem. This is exactly what is happening in the UK. Because of Brexit, because they left the European Union, you know, British or English companies now find that they can't actually operate in the same way in the EU. They've got to now fill in all sorts of forms and so on, all sorts of taxes. So what they're doing is they're shifting their businesses from England into Belgium, France, or whatever. Why? Because, you know, because of taxation. So I think, you know, we've got to realize, if you take our MPs, when you take our MCAs, when you take our people who are in government in the counties, I remember those words which, you know, were stated by the head of the Institute of Economic Affairs here in Kenya. Look, how are we going to pay for this new constitution? You know, that is a very relevant question. And remember, the member of the committee of experts who was speaking there said the counties will pay their own contribution. Just, you know, keep up to date. This is not happening. 10 years later, or 12 or 13, we're coming to 13 years later, this is not happening. And not only that, when people...
And they're demanding more from the exchequer.
Well, you see, they're demanding more, but also when they impose taxes, what happens? a business person will move out of, let's say, Kakamega into some other county. So, you know, we got to understand that, you know, when you start raising tax, East African breweries, the consumption of beer in Kenya has gone down in the last year. Why? Because of taxes imposed. Probably the revenue that is collected by the Kenya Revenue Authority is actually lower because of the higher tax. Whereas beer consumption in Uganda and Tanzania has gone up. And if you're in Busia, you know, what do? You go across the border to drink cheaper beer in Uganda rather than drink more expensive beer in Kenya. It's the same, well, it's not quite the same beer because it's brewed in Uganda, but Uganda Breweries is a subsidiary of East African Breweries. So what are we doing in Kenya? So often we're driving things out of Kenya. We're driving business out of Kenya. You know, I was talking to someone the other day, and, you know, there was some people who were actually at a conference, okay? The people in Tanzania implemented what they were talking about. We in Kenya lagged behind. We now import rice from Tanzania. So you see, the point here really is that we're taxing Kenya out of existence. I was talking to someone from Argentina yesterday. That country, 100 years ago, if you say, look, I'm from Argentina, wow, you're a rich man. Today, Argentina, the rate of inflation in Argentina is 95%. The country is broken. By whom? By politicians. So, you see, you know, when you get a group of people in control of a country, and they then say, well, look, you know, don't worry about working. Yeah, pesa tu, you know. You destroy the country. But now, what's the government trying to do? The government is trying to get into everything in Kenya. Everything. And the problem is, we're going to actually, you know, well, I don't have children, I don't have to worry about it. But the majority of Kenyans, they've got to, where I was talking to a past student yesterday. She's in Rwanda. Another one is in Bermuda. Another one is in London. So we're driving the youth of this country out of the country by our reckless taxation. It is reckless because, you know, it's carried out by people who then go and spend the money, you know, the MPs, and I had to attend, you know, a calling. The MPs called me last year. I had to fly to Kisumu. It cost 35,000 shillings because it was the day before I had to go there. So we booked the ticket. This is, you know, now who pays that?
That was a late booking.
It was a late booking.
Which is, of course, costly, yeah.
Exactly. So, you know, the problem is, and why do we do it in Bungoma? All the people live in Nairobi. They've all got offices in Nairobi. Per diem, bwana. Per diem. Tunataka per diem. So, you know, the point here is that, you know, when I get into a position of responsibility in Kenya, I become irresponsible. You know, and we have a trade deficit of 2 trillion shillings. This is why we've got to go and borrow dollars in order to repay our loans if we got to repay a dollar loan. So, you know, how do we get out of this? We get out of this by people realizing, look, there's no such thing as a free lunch. Someone has got to pay. And that someone very often is the Wananchi. We talk about nationalizing KQ.
Yes.
I'm Mzungu. I'm flying to London, being subsidized by Njoroge in Kiambu or someone Wafule in Bungoma. So the point here really is that, you know, we don't know what we're talking about. Our MPs, you know, there's something in the paper today. We're going to have value addition to tea. You know nothing about the tea industry. Why are you trying to do something that is absolutely impossible to do? Go and talk to the tea experts. Martin Ocheng, the managing director of Sassini. Go and talk to him. But, you know, they don't. How about, yes, value addition. What is value addition? Value addition. Value addition. Sijui.
Value addition is being bandied around, of course. People have no certain idea what value addition is. Dr. Shemochozo, good morning. Yes.
Debal, on whether or not to get Kenyans drink more beer or less. With a light touch,
Yes.
there are pros and cons to that.
I agree.
But obviously, in terms of the economy running, generating more revenue, maybe spending a little more to run the economy, that cannot be contested. In terms of, although Dr. McAfee either inadvertently or deliberately avoided the question you asked, the politicization of taxation. The current rage of whether past presidents should be exempt from tax and all. I think that's something that will be talked about. But I cannot fail to agree with him on Kenya is an overtaxed country, no doubt. And I fully agree. Sometimes when you tax more, you actually end up collecting less. I think that's the simple logic. I remember this when I was a little younger as an employee of Kenya Post and Telecoms, we used to be told there were very high charges. We thought we would make more money by charging high. But of course, as time has proven, it's better you charge lower and make money from volume sales, large volumes. I think the same applies. I'm not an economist. The two colleagues are perhaps better placed in that regard. But as a layman and as a logician, I think it would make sense if we reduced our tax a little bit. I have no major problem of labor, people going out to work in other jurisdictions. If at the end of the day, of course, they bring us back more hard currency, it's not bad. But if they're going out simply because we are not able to create enough jobs, then of course that's something. But more so if that's happening because of high taxes, that we're driving away businesses, then it's not good for the country. We need to do something about that. I must maybe finally just mention in this regard, the BAL, I was very delighted to see history being made in Kenya a few days ago when we had the first paperless cabinet taking place. I remember last time we were here, I was wondering whether President Dr. Ruto is reading a script from President Kagame. I think if he's on the right track in that regard, in promoting digitization, and that's the way to go. But yes, in terms of past presidents, I think all Kenyans, or all residents in Kenya, let me put it that way, should pay tax in the same manner that everybody else does. But of course, when you start taxing labor or services being exported across borders, you are treading on the prospect of double taxation. Because if, say, somebody exports labor to Tanzania, I'll deliberately use that so that I'm not conflicted. I would want to believe that Tanzania government already levies a tax. Kenya needs to find out if there aren't, I would want to believe there are already bilateral tax arrangements or agreements so that there's no double taxation. But yes, government has to collect tax because development has to be brought, government has to run, it's got to collect tax. But let's do it responsibly and reasonably and in a cost-efficient manner. I think there's quite a lot of wastage we need to look at, both in terms of expenditure and even in terms of how we collect the tax. I think that's what I would say, but I'll leave it to the experts.
Right, let me just welcome Bunyasi Sakwa, an economist as well, to chime in. Still, as we just got in, we just began a conversation around taxation with the latest development of the tax wars as well. We have Senator Gerard Guy, who has now come up with an amendment bill, so to speak, to try and make sure that different regimes that have not really been paying the estate duty levy, they do so, in trying also to make sure that we have an even keel for every Kenyan to be paying the fair share of what belongs to Caesar. I don't know, what is your reading so far, just generally speaking?
Thanks, Debal. I said I was running late this morning. Well, the tax is one of these things we do not love to do, but which we have to do. And as the saying goes, there are some places where you're taxed from birth to death. Actually, from birth to after death. Because there are death taxes in many countries on the estates you live, on the transfer of those estates, on the maintenance, on the retention of those estates, you still have to pay taxes. I have a slightly different view. We may be, I don't know the aggregate figures we have of what you could say is the average taxation of a citizen in Kenya. One can analyze that and give weights as it is due to get that kind of figure. Like we say about the Scandinavians, they have taxation rates that the average ones are in the upper 40s, but individual taxes can be as high as anything below 100. So I have a slightly different take on this. I think the one thing that is happening is that with the digitization and with the increased monetization of the economy, the tax opportunities are now showing up everywhere, and people are reacting to that because of low economic growth. Incomes, disposable incomes are not going up very much, so you're taxing, and enterprises are also not making such huge profits. People feel any incremental tax as a big burden. I think where we might have to begin to look, I don't think it is going to be on the taxes for now. I think it's going to be on the expenditure side, in my view. We're going to have to begin to look at how we are spending the money, just in terms of its quantum. And then, of course, within it also, you'd also look at its purpose. So you can say, is this something we could have done better if it was tomorrow, meaning in the future? Or is this something that we're simply catching up because we didn't do it before? So there is a bit of sorting out that needs to be done. But I also like the fact that Kenyans are very aware of any additional taxes, no matter how tiny it might be, because now many people are reading, their news on their handsets. Occasionally, they might buy papers. Papers are a bit expensive outside of Nairobi, in rural areas. Where I live at home, I'd go about 10 kilometers. I'd send a car 10 kilometers or a piki to go and bring me a newspaper. So that's a high
10 kilometers.
Yeah, yes. We go bring in newspaper. Or you have to coincide with when I'll pass by there or when somebody will pass by there. So they don't get as much news from the print media. A little bit, the snapshots that you get on radio, if the Kenya Power and Lighting Company allows us to watch television. So it is in the handsets you get, social media and so on. So I think that if we once begin to get into it systematically, we have to look very much at our basket of expenditure. What is it we are doing? Particularly some of the big, what do you call that? Power, not powers in electricity, but powers in a measure of who you are or what country you are, so on. Some expensive projects. In the old days, they used to be called white elephants, but sometimes they get to be used, so they're not quite white elephants anymore. So the taxation issue, I just think that we are in the process of exploring opportunities, but meeting resistance because of increased information. And as I end this, I think heads of state, we began a bad tradition. Heads of state may be exempt on what is quote-unquote their salaries, which is very small, I can tell you. The presidents now, officially, they earn about 2.5 million shillings, but some allowances loaded in as well. And the element of salary may be the areas that, while their presidents might be considered for exemption, I don't know for what reason, because people become presidents in Africa and in Kenya, really can't pay that extra tax. But I think that we have an element of collective sycophancy that we see in Kenya from time to time. When presidents are leaving, everybody's trying to fall head over their heels to try and do something nice for them. No, they shouldn't pay taxes. Oh, no, we should increase their package. And the packages become quite big. So I think that those are things that really we need to look at critically.
Thank you. Let me rope in Bill Okero. Good morning, good to see you. And I know it has been the topic, I think, since we started this year, tax, and everyone had a belly full of tax. But the latest development of manufacturers, according to the Kenya Association of Manufacturers, who are now rejecting these stamp duties, and they're saying, no, we cannot go that way because it's not sustainable. Jobs losses will, of course, be something that we'll have to consider if the government really persists on this. We have also right now, I think we couldn't call it an environmental tax, that now every motorist, if you're owning a car, and of course, in a bid to curb, the emissions as well, you'll be taxed. That is according to the new proposal, that if it's really given the green light.
Morning, sorry, our morning prayers depend on the dawn.
Yes.
The dawn time changes. So lately it's falling behind, so that's why I'm a bit late. But
it's falling behind us. So
yeah, because sunrise now is around 6:40, so time moves.
So you have a longer day.
Yeah.
And a shorter night.
So when I saw this traffic congestion tax,
yes,
I was really very disappointed. And I felt our government, some of the technocrats in government, are not in touch with reality in this country. In a country that cannot even feed its people, half the population are facing extreme hunger or living below the poverty line. People don't even have water to drink. You can't pay school fees. Medical service is not available to majority. You are worried about carbon emissions. You are worried about introducing tax. You want to comply with COP27 and others. The developed countries who are contributing all the pollution, 90% are not doing these things. Where are we heading to? These are people who live in glass towers. They don't even know what the rest of the country is going through. And so it's the same problem everywhere. Taxes and taxes and taxes. And this problem is being led by the top. When the leader of the nation says, I want the tax to be doubled, take it from 2 trillion this year, I want it to be 4 trillion, I want it to be 6 trillion.
Yeah.
And you are not looking at the economy. Is the economy growing? Are people got jobs? Are incomes increasing? What about the inflation, the cost of living? You don't bother about all those things. You're interested in collecting money. I think this is where the problem is. And many of the people in the manufacturing, like every other business, are concerned about this, because manufacturers have raised this through Kenya Association of Manufacturers many times. The level of taxes and the number of taxes, they come under very many names. This government is smart. They don't just introduce an increase in VAT. They haven't done that in more than a decade. It's been at 16. But every time they want money, they introduce a levy. You call it this authority levy and that authority levy and this development levy and that development levy. So in every business, there are about 4, 5, 6, 7. In mine, there are 4 different types of levies in the food industry. You go to petroleum, they're up to 9. So I think it's becoming. We have made this country very uncompetitive in terms of production, the cost of production. This is why companies are relocating to other countries. And I have said it many times, even our rate of corporation tax is still one of the highest in Africa. We cannot compete really with this level of, and so with the targets being set for KRA, people are coming and spending a lot of time trying to address tax issues with KRA, because they come in with all sorts of arbitrary assessments because of deadlines and because of targets that they have to meet. So I think we need to really address this issue. We cannot continue. Today I'm reading in the papers the tea industry. They have 4 or 5 different types of taxes and levies and whatever, and they're saying that is making it very uncompetitive. They want it removed. I could see members of parliament from that area saying, So I think it is not right for government to focus only on collecting revenue and ignore the most important, the elephant in the room, which is how that money is being spent. I mean, if we had value for money, you don't need 4 trillion to run this country. You don't need 6 trillion to run this country. You can run very effectively and efficiently and provide the services the government is required to run with your 2 trillion, because the 2 trillion is more than what the rest of the countries in East Africa are collecting, and they are running their countries, very well. In Ethiopia, every shilling is value for money. People are not used to extravagance. It's a wastage. Everything is inflated. Prices are inflated in procurements. When you're buying this phone, you buy for 50,000. If it is government buying, it's 200,000, 300,000. So I think we see that wastage being repeated all over at every level of government. So in my view, I think the taxation is becoming a major issue, and that is being used now, in politics.
Yes.
It's not surprising. But I would have thought this government, having come through this problem during the campaigns, they said, taxation has been weaponized. KRA was weaponized and used against us. Should avoid anything that would create a similar impression by the others, that now that they're in power, then they can also be seen to be using tax to be a way of punishing. I think that perception is something that they need to avoid. Otherwise, it would appear like, they're on a revenge mission. They use tax on us, we're going to use tax on them. They have to pay taxes or we're going to lock them up.
It is way too soon. The timing is not really right.
Yes, it's completely inappropriate. And I think, especially when the president speaks about it, those who are not paying taxes are the ones financing demonstrations. So tomorrow now, if anybody sees KRA running around, then the perception is that, of course, it's politics. They are being sent to carry out that. So I think we have to really leave politics out of some of these things. Even if it is there, people are not paying tax. Everyone knows, by the way. The government knows more than anyone else. All those people who have been given exemptions, institutions and companies by Treasury, because Treasury writes to KRA to exempt people. And various companies and institutions, they know, they have all the lists, they have everyone, but they need to act professionally. You don't have to take it to the marketplace, so I think it's inappropriate in my view.
Well, Dr. Bakfi, when you look at this congestion tax, I think there's still a proposal as well. We're talking about climate financing, and just recently, is it 2 weeks ago, we had the IMF or one of the Bretton Woods institutions in Rwanda talking about the climate financing and how we should pull up our socks in trying to, in a bid to try to bring Africa in traction with climate financing, which I really found it to be a bit spurious for me, because I know, first of all, who are the people who are emitting emissions here. It's not really through Africa in the first place. I think it is the Western world. The emission from Africa, I think, is around 3%, if I'm not really wrong, compared to the global emission that we are getting from the West as it is. Why should we? Do you see any correlation? This happening right now with the congestion on congestion tax in a bid to curb pollution on road, and the visit of the Bretton Woods institutions in Rwanda? I think some of the ministers here were there.
It's, as Billo mentioned, actually, it's a little bit of a complicated story. I remember I was in Texas in 2001, and I was giving a series of lectures there. And at that time, the population of Texas was 20 million, and they owned 10 million cars. At that particular time, our population was quite a little bit lower than it is now, but we owned 1 million cars. Today, the number of cars we own in Kenya is 4.35 million. So it's gone up very, very substantially. And this is one of the reasons why you have this congestion. For example, in Nairobi, it's always a little bit difficult, actually, in relation to, I remember when Nairobi City Council, as it was at that time, Nairobi County today, raised the parking fee, I was actually in support of that. And the reason why is that if it's more expensive for me to come by car into Nairobi, I may actually use alternative means. I may use a matatu. One of the problems all the time is that, if I'm using a matatu, what will happen is that, I can get robbed. I was talking to someone, was it yesterday or the day before, he was in a matatu, he answered my phone. But I just wondered now, is he going to get to his destination with that phone? Because this is, many of my students actually are actually robbed on, when, they travel by matatu and they're robbed on the matatu. So, but I take up the point that you are making. You see, the biggest polluter in the world at the moment is China. Okay, the second is the United States. The United States have actually reduced its emissions, but we go back to this thing that if you take 20 million Texans, they own 10 million cars. If you take 50 million Kenyans, they own less than 5 million cars. So I think now we're trying to develop as a country where the developing countries are all we're trying to have people be able to travel from one place to another more easily. The West comes along and says, now, wait a moment, you have got to stop your emissions. We grow a lot of tea in Kenya. tea, the raw, what tea needs in order to grow is carbon dioxide. Trees, in Sicily, there are 1,500,000 trees in the estates up at Sotique. The raw material, what they're absorbing, in order to grow, they need carbon dioxide. So the fact is that, one of our biggest exports, actually, our biggest export is tea. In the 11 months of last year, the first 11 months, we earned almost 150 billion shillings from tea. So all of that is actually absorbing carbon dioxide. So the West comes along and says now, Joe Biden, well, you've got to cut your Al Gore and all these American people, you've got to cut your emissions. Now, wait a moment, you've got to begin. And, in COP26, Joe Biden said, okay, we're back at the table, we're going to lead by example. 5 days later, he went back to the United States and he licensed 84 million acres of the Gulf of Mexico, which is immediately adjacent to the U.S. He said, now, U.S. Oil and gas companies, you go in and you exploit the oil and the gas in that particular place. That place is twice the size of Florida. So, you see, the West continues with its hypocrisy. And this is, we know Putin is bad. Everyone has said it. We all agree. He shouldn't have invaded Ukraine. The United States, they invaded Iraq. They invaded Afghanistan. We are the saviors of the world. So this hypocrisy on the part of the West, you find it in every country in the Western world. So, here I tend to feel that we can't just simply, in order to get investments, unfortunately, today you've got to think about ESG, the environment, your social contribution, and also, your governance. I remember I was once in the United States in June. You go into a shop and there's a boy serving there. His father, I don't know what he's doing, but there's a boy serving in the shop. Why, it's summer, he's not at school. Now, I remember once I was up in Tinderet Tea Estate and a man collected 100 kilos in a day. I said, look, this is magendo. But I investigated the matter. I was an auditor at that time. The man had got his wife and his children to come and collect tea with him. The United States will say, this is child labor. And what about that boy in that shop in the United States? Is that child labor or not? So this hypocrisy, I tell you, is constant. And we are the sufferers of it, okay? It sounds good to, especially the World Bank and the IMF and, the donors. These people are not donors. When they come here, they live like presidents. They're in the presidential suite of, whatever hotel they're staying in. And if you look at the money spent, okay, we have this 2 trillion shilling deficit, trade deficit, but part of it actually, thank God, is paid for by the UN, by all the embassies in Nairobi, because very often you'll have an embassy in Nairobi, you won't have one in Tanzania, you won't have one in Uganda, simply because they will operate out of Kenya. So they contribute to that trade deficit, but at the same time they're bringing in dollars. So I think in this particular case, I feel that let's not try to just simply tell the Western world, we're actually looking at, this. Well, we got to tell them that. But I think, the purpose of a congestion tax, we have congestion, go on the expressway in Kenya, in Nairobi. It's beautiful, it's relaxing. You're not fighting matatus and, Why don't we have more expressways? They're expensive, but we need them. We need one up the Ngong Road. So we got to invest. It's not an easy thing because, our resources are limited. So, but I feel that, this, I would agree entirely with Bilo. And also, this, one tax, the other tax, you fail by one day, you're penalized by an incredible amount of money. We're driving business out of Kenya. If you go to a country like Vietnam, their manufacturing is increasing in terms of GDP. Ours is decreasing.
We need to ask ourselves what's happening, and it's all about the taxation, as you say it. We are due for a station break right now. When we circle back also, we look at the Central Bank of Kenya, which is expecting stable foreign exchange market on favorable external deficit. And we have the governor stating that the deficit, which improved by 4.9% of GDP at the end of last year, is forecasted to reach 5.4% this year, close to the ideal level of 5%. And he attributed this to higher exports from tea and manufactured goods, as well as an increase in remittances. This is for the diaspora factor that we've been talking about. We know about the Kenyan shilling that weakened 9% against the dollar last year. The currency has so far this year lost 0.8% against the dollar, according to Central Bank. So we want to look at this when we circle back. How will it fare? Remittance as well. We've been talking largely on it with the chair of Kenya Diaspora Alliance here on the show. Don't go away. Much more coming up.